Yo, this right here is dedicated to the dedicated snow fighters. We see you.
All right, welcome to Net Gain. This is networking, encouragement, and training. I'm your host, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. Have a very special guest with me today, Craig Sandmann from Hilltip. Craig, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure thing, Evan. Thanks for having me today. My name is Craig Sandmann. I am the managing director of Hilltip Corporation in North America. Hilltip is a leading European manufacturer of snow and ice control equipment. Launched here in North America in 2020 and 2022 acquired a domestic company that established our headquarters in Fort Wayne, and then last November opened a brand new manufacturing facility to provide our customers in North America with products built in North America. So I'm involved in all aspects of that business, from business development and onboarding to some of the production and operations management there as well.
Very cool. So it sounds like, in addition to, I know you from the business development side, but it sounds like you also have the experience in production and kind of all around view of the operation, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. My job, unique in that our corporate headquarters is located in Pietarsaari, Finland. And so from the very early days of our launch here in North America, I've been involved in really every aspect of that business, including, developing brokers, for example, for all the clearance operations of inbound containers, from accounting to banking to you name it. But definitely got my hands on a lot of different things, given that nuance. And as I often joke with my colleagues in Finland, I'd love to know what a normal year looks like for Hilltip in North America, because we launched 3 days before COVID shut the continent down. The next year we had supply chain issues with containers, and then the following year, all of the recessionary type of environment, and now living in an environment of tariffs. So it's definitely unique. It has its challenges.
Yeah. So it sounds like definitely pivoting has been the name of the game to success between the, COVID, supply chain, tariffs, recovery, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure in all businesses, certainly you have to have a lot of flexibility and be able to kind of roll with the punches. But that's really kind of in our DNA, to be truthful, with the way we develop products and they being so heavily technologically based. That changes on the daily. So it's not anything we don't usually deal with, but sometimes it throws you those curveballs you don't always expect. You just have to, as I say, weave and bob a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to jump in and get started. I always start with an encouragement for those listening. And so my encouragement for this month is really, especially as we're getting close to winter season, this is recorded in October for those watching later, but really can apply any time of year, is find wins. And with finding wins, be kind to yourself and be kind to others. As Craig, you just kind of talked about, when there's a lot of pivoting, whether it's tariffs, uncertainty in the economy, uncertainty in business, challenges can cause you to either be hard on yourself, hard on your teammates. But what I want to encourage people with is find wins, recognize people for good work, and even find wins for yourself. Those of you who, I imagine people listening to this, you're probably a high achiever because you're investing in your own professional development. But I encourage you to find some wins, both for yourself, to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually very well said, Evan. And I can tell you from a person of experience, having nearly 35 years in this business and across the spectrum of business development with products that were unknown to the business. Yet you have to approach each day with a little bit of patience, a little bit of understanding about the process. Give yourself a little bit of the time to let things, as I always say, marinate and work a bit. And to your point, especially in our case, and I kind of live those words only because when we came ashore, nobody knew who we were. I mean, nobody. I mean, we had not one nut or bolt or screw or anything on shore. And so every sale, you're stacking. And now here we are, not necessarily as big as I want to be. We're growing in that direction, but we certainly have a seat at the table. So absolutely, give yourself the wins, give yourself the break, and always try to maintain a little bit of that, what shall we say, the work-life balance a little bit, because the worst thing you can do is burn yourself out to the point that what you're doing is it becomes more work than it is the fun that you're having in your job. So
Absolutely. And I appreciate that encouragement. And like you said, recognizing those wins along the way and the work-life balance or integration, what you want to call it. Definitely the takeaway is to not burn out. And I'd say part of not burning out is both, like I said, giving yourself credit and recognizing yourself and your team for your wins, but also having patience with the process. One thing about recognition from a employee engagement standpoint is a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot, but some people think, well, I'll recognize when the storm's done or when the season's done or when we close this sales season, and truth, or even when a sale's made. And truthfully, there's activities that are good activities that get you toward that. So like if somebody does a great presentation, recognize them for that presentation, because anything you recognize really is repeatable, and you want people to repeat those good behaviors ongoing and ongoing.
Absolutely. And doing that also is a form of empowerment. You know what I mean? On our business in particular, kind of working and trying to mesh the North American culture, work culture, with that of the Europeans, which is, if you've never worked with Europeans, is very different. They approach things more with the less is more mentality, i.e., hey, Evan, you're expected to do all of these different jobs, and, sure, you can do them, but are you doing them all well? So it's, to your point, if somebody's not going to cover off the ball on something that you've empowered them to do, I think that fuels personal initiative and growth on behalf of that employee, and then, shows that trust factor, that level of, belief in that employee, that they can kind of pick up the ball and run with it, knowing what the expectations are. So that's a win-win across the board.
Yeah, definitely. I like that belief in the employee. Really, it's a positive cycle. It fuels it. So kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of our discussion on salt tracking systems. So, want to provide this value for the industry is really, why would you say, Craig, why is it important for companies to be tracking their salt and de-icing usage?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I would kind of ask the question a different way. Why aren't you tracking your salt and your usage? And there are so many talking points, and I think it's kind of relative to frame the conversation against contemporaneous things that are happening in the business, okay? And anybody certainly can shoot a hole in this. I'm open to ideas and dialogue, but as I see it, two things predominantly right now in the business are legislative initiatives, okay? So those are not going to go away. Everybody wants the clean water and the green grass and all the clean air. Don't get me wrong. We all want that. I don't know that anybody wants to be mandated to have to pay for that, right? So what I see happening across several provinces and several states here in the U.S., this legislative initiative that's putting into place, or codifying, if you will, reductions in chlorides and other hazardous chemicals, not too terribly dissimilar that they do in agriculture. So over the horizon, the salt tracking is a big key component of this, because quite frankly, we can't manage that problem if we can't measure the problem. So we have to see where the Mendoza line is, what are we doing, and then try to improve from that. The other aspect is, as we evolve in the business with technology in particular, and you look at the aggregate age of a lot of our operators and users and things, we're living in a time where everything is digitized, everything is instantaneous, everything is app-based. And when I say to somebody, hey, we're in the 21st century, but you can't tell me what's coming out of the back of your spreader, well, then how can, from a baseline business perspective, how can you tell me you're making any money? So when we start looking at the benefit of salt tracking as it overlays with a lot of our contractors' core business, I mean, salt tracking helps to address a lot of things. The insurance aspect of your business, and giving you the proper documentations in the case of litigious behavior. You are already on the path of improved environmental practices, the cost control of what you're doing, the automation of your operation and the optimization of your routes, and the better use of employees that we're talking about. All of these things are made possible by tracking and the data it provides.
Yeah, definitely. I like the way you framed it, first of all, of why aren't you tracking, kind of to challenge the contractors out there. I know some are, some might be thinking about it, getting into it, but good question to ponder. And then from a teaching perspective, the takeaways I really pulled from what you said is, number one, why it's important is because from a legislative standpoint, it's becoming more and more litigious, more and more looked at in different provinces and states. So it's something that's going to come down the line that way. And then also, too, just being good to the environment in general can actually be a competitive advantage for you if you're showing that you're taking that proactive approach. And then I like what you said about you can't manage what you can't measure. So measuring it helps you manage it from a financial perspective. Are your contracts profitable? Are certain sites profitable? Are there adjustments you can make to make sites more profitable? And the efficiency too, to know that, hey, maybe I don't need to send a plow crew out necessarily because I can adjust my chloride usage up or down, my de-icing usage up or down on a certain site to reduce my labor hours. So it almost sounds like data to really help make better decisions in a lot of different ways.
Well, and I think that's absolutely true of any business, Evan. I mean, let's say, for example, you and I were selling plastic bottles, okay? And we were selling them for $1. And we were doing so because we didn't know how much they really cost. But if then I came back to you later and said, hey, Evan, that plastic bottle you're selling for $1 actually cost you $5, would you continue to do it that way? Mm-hmm. And the answer, if you want to stay in business, no, you would not. You'd have to change that practice. And all I'm suggesting is tracking systems is best, I think, exemplified by the one that we manufacture because of its comprehensive nature, just gives you the raw data that you can make these verifiable good business decisions from. And when you start to, as I always say, take that 10,000 mile worldview of things, take a step back from your business, and let's start analyzing all the strategic costs that go into just simply getting a piece of equipment with an operator and a truck on a site, and then overlay that with the data that we're getting from the tracking system and applying what we're learning for the optimization of all aspects of those costs. So for example, with the use of our system or similar, you would know before you go, i.e. you've got a 2-yard spreader, 4,000 pounds in the hopper. Hey, I can treat 7 out of 10 sites. And those routes are optimized, which then saves fuel, time, brakes, overtime, wear and tear, that kind of thing. These are all things that go into the cost structure of getting a contract and servicing the contract. And it's just using that information to your benefit.
Nice. Yeah, I like that breakdown too, and how you said about optimizing routes. Then you can look at, like you said, wear and tear and other, hours for employees, other kind of costs that you could maybe make that adjustment on. Because I know obviously when you introduce any kind of new potential cost, whether here's some equipment to consider, that's always kind of the objection of like, was it going to be worth it? So to think about the other ways it's going to be worth it, of helping but then also helping you reduce costs in different areas, and even helping you to maybe increase price the right way, because you are adding this value add that you can say to your clients, hey, we are now tracking de-icer usage. We're, environmentally friendly. Here's how it works. We're also tracking to make sure we don't overdo and corrode your parking lot, that we can examine that we're not oversalting to the point where it's obnoxious or it's going to damage your lot, which is then for you as a client, yeah, we raised the price here, but that's going to save your paving costs later. So it's all working those elements together.
Well said. I mean, the value added part is something from a specifically sales perspective I really emphasize, especially with our systems, because the data that you have, it can be utilized in so many ways as you compete with your competition. An example I would give you is, let's say you and I are both bidding the biggest area in town, the newest, sexiest retail space, for example, and you have our system, I do not. Well, what you can do with our system certainly is see how big it is, apply the application rate hypothetically to it, know how much that cost is. If you're using pre-wet, we can do some things to tweak that makes you more efficient and more profitable. You can compare the site against other similar sizes. And then when we both make our presentations to the property management group, you say, okay, well, hey, we've got documentation, so you're going to pay me. So I'm not going to have to sue you. I can prove when I was here. If Mrs. Jones slips and falls 3 stalls from the front door, I can tell you exactly what happened where she fell, which is helping reduce your insurance exposure, your litigation exposure. And oh yeah, gee whiz, by the way, I'm greener, and I can prove that to you. If we are both kind of comparably bidding a comparable price point, I would say I would have to go with you because of what you said, the value-added service that this type of technology would provide.
100%. And I think those are all really great points. So kind of getting into a little more, we talked about the value adds and why we should track salt, but talk about your salt tracking systems, really kind of nuts and bolts, what they are and how they work, so that if a contractor's interested, they can know what they're purchasing.
Yeah. So H-Track is our brand name for the Hilltip developed system. And what this is, it's a two-way tracking and control system. And effectively, you can log into any device anywhere in the world into your portal, and provided that your equipment is connected to Wi-Fi and have active, certainly subscriptions for the data transference, you can see your equipment, where it is, what it's doing, how fast it is, and so going and so on. But beyond that, I mean, the benefit of it is we can geofence a site, for example. I can assign an application rate, so I know how much material is supposed to be on that site. I can then assign that site to a specific controller. So all my operator has to do, or any operator, quite frankly, you could put 5 different people in the same truck 5 days in a row. They hit that site, and every time the machine will default to what you want it to do. So the two-way aspect comes is, let's say I'm the general manager of a contractor, and you're out on the site, Evan, and I see you doing something I don't like. I can override what your machine is doing remotely from where I am. I can change your application metrics. I can add sites, turn on or off options, any of that stuff. And so really, whenever that machine is on, I have eyes on you. So then I can generate all kinds of reports like what was your optimal time and distance efficiencies. And I can use that as a review tool. I can use that to identify shortcomings in our training program for you. But more importantly, above all else, this system gives you complete and total control over your fleet. And so you'll know exactly where you were, what you did, when you did it, and so on. Now, H-Track in and of itself is not a product that we offer for general consumption. It is only applicable to Hilltip ice striker spreaders or spray striker sprayers. So when you buy a piece of equipment, as I always say, any one of our pieces of equipment, there's 3 legs to that system, as we'll call it. One is the specificational side, why I can make the case that I think our stuff is better than the competition in a comparable space. 2 is the Strike Smart control interface, which is very automated, unlike anything that's currently in use in America. And then the third component is H-Track. Those 3 are vertically integrated, manufactured and maintained by Hilltip. So, we have access to all of that data all of the time. We're not dependent upon outside providers for any portion of this. It's all Hilltip.
Really good. No, thank you for that breakdown and, talking about the integration. So thinking about now, if companies were, say, thinking about purchasing your system or, any kind of salt tracking system equipment, what is some of the things that they should really think about as far as both pre-work before you purchase, follow up with implementation? What are some best practices to get the most out of it?
Yeah, great question. And really, not to sound obviously too preferential to ours, which I lean this way, and I would recommend it only because of its comprehensive nature. Okay, so when we're using the term salt tracking, I'm using it from the perspective of H-Track, which can give you all measurables you want: distance, time, speed, operator, application rate, who, what, when, where, why, how, all of that in one platform. Some of our competitors in this space offer tracking. Now, tracking in some cases is as simple as doing it off of a phone, where I can tell you where the truck is, but you can't tell me what the spreader is doing. Some systems have data collection, I should say. They can say, okay, at a calibrated rate of 400 pounds a minute, for example, at this position setting on my controller, I can tell you in an 8-hour window, we've put this much salt down. Okay, but that doesn't tell you where you put it, and at what speed you put it, and at what application rate you put it. So what I would say to anybody searching for a system is have an understanding of what your expectations are of the system. So if you are really just interested, let's say, to know exactly how much material is coming out of a spreader or a sprayer, there are systems that you can purchase that can meter that. Some are electric driven, some are retrofittable, some are hydraulic. If you are interested in tracking and using information or integration with third-party software providers like a Yeti or a Nected, a Site Photos, anything like that, some of those systems already have tracking and it can tell you where you are, but you're just taking site-specific information like, hey, we showed up at this time, this is what it looked like, this is the post-treatment, but those systems aren't telling you how much you've put out. And then, obviously then you look at ours, which is the more comprehensive. So the main question you have to ask yourself is, what's more important? Are you more interested in grabbing information on material consumed? Are you more interested in knowing where your equipment was and at what time? Are you more interested in recording pre and post results? And if those are the metrics, then there are plenty of systems that can provide that for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like the takeaway there is really start by knowing what you want to track and what metrics you want to report on. Do you just want to know, like you said, where your trucks were? You want to know total how much was, put out of salt or de-icer? You want to know the application rates on different sites, maybe even at different times of day, depending on hours of operation. So starting with what you want to know, and that actually, I'll shamelessly plug an article I have coming out in Snow Business Magazine, which should be coming out right around the time I'll release this, give or take. But I had wrote for their technology issue about, from the HR side with people processes, same kind of principle of make sure you know before purchasing a software what you want it to do. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Because, yeah, well said, Evan. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people will tell you what they need, and what they need isn't really what they want. And so you have to really, before you start spending copious amounts of dollars in implementation of a system, really kind of determine what it is you want. You know what I mean? Not what you think you need, because those two could lead you to drastically different places. Our system, I would say, for example, if you had to overlay it against the backdrop of the industry, we have more in common actually with a lot of the central hydraulic system providers that commonly sell componentry to municipalities insofar as they can record speed, time, date, distance, and all of these things. But unlike those systems, they can't tell you where you put it, what time at what speed, and all of those things, those specifics. And I'm not a contractor, so I don't want to assume anything, but I would say if you went up to a random contractor and said, hey, if I could provide a system that told you, Evan, exactly where I put the 500 pounds of salt I spread and at what rate and speed and time and all that, everybody would be interested in that information. At the end of the day, we're talking about numbers, and I always say the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Numbers, they're not going to lie, but what numbers do is give you a good, firm basis, a very objective basis upon which to make good business decisions going forward.
Yeah, and so the last question, thank you for that. It's been excellent discussion. The last question I wanted to close on is kind of off of, you set it up perfectly. We worked this out beforehand, except we didn't. This is like the perfect setup, because you said about numbers give you the basis to make good business decisions on. So have you seen in any ways good examples of how people have used data and things like post-storm reviews and really made better decisions? Or do you have any recommendations of how, when like review after a storm, you do a debrief, what are some good dashboards or reports that people should be looking at, and how should they be making decisions off that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's kind of an evolving process, right? Because there's so many variables that go into our business, like region, types of snow, ambient temperature, relative humidity, and all these things. But just overarchingly, and this would be true of anybody's system, just to give yourself a fair and equitable opportunity to get the return on investment in that technology. And I always say it's setting the Mendoza line, right? Find out, know what you don't know, and know it. Meaning, okay, we've done this site for years. It takes 2 yards off of a XYZ hopper. Perfect. How much is that? We don't know. Okay, let's take a tracking system and a spreader, and let's assign a setting to this, and let's track it. And let's check the results. Say, hey, that's getting the job done. Okay, there's your Mendoza line. You've just set that. Now, that's the line from which we are going to grow off of. So, for example, we'll start a treatment session at 5 pounds 1,000 in a retail space at a 30% pre-wet metric, getting the job done all day. Okay, the next storm, let's drop that to 4 pounds and bump our pre-wet to 32. Still getting the job done. Let's drop it to 3 and bump it to 35, and so on. So it's an evolving process, but you will arrive at the destination eventually that says, hey, for area ABC in the United States, this minimal bulk application with this liquid ratio is going to get the job done. And we know that. And going forward, so if you called me out of the blue and said, hey, I've got this property, I look it up, I know with a fair amount of surety that I can quote this rate and know I'm going to make some money without even going there. So that's kind of the numbers process. You're going to get these numbers, but the key is learn from the numbers, evolve from the numbers, apply what you're learning from the numbers, and then apply it to everything else in your fleet. Get everything on a uniform kind of code, if you will, of application. So with a fair amount of assurance that, hey, spreader A, B, C is going to do the same work as DEF and XYZ and so down the line. So
Awesome. So yeah, I think the takeaway is you said it very well. Set the Mendoza line. Like figure out, okay, we're servicing well here, because when you have that good Mendoza line, then you can experiment of, can we reduce de-icer? Can we change our mix or change our application times and still provide effective service and save costs? And then obviously, if you can or you struggle, it's like, okay, we do need to pull it back up to here. Or if you can, then you know, okay, we were able to save the client money, we were able to save ourselves money and really be able to maybe be less corrosive on the property, but still do the same job.
1,000%. And that data, I hate to say it, kind of almost spurs its own type of position, if you will, because then it gets into the analysis. When you start getting into large contractors, for example, that maybe would go out for 20, 30 times in a season, the answer is always and, meaning, let's say we do a target, at 2:00 in the afternoon, and that average site's taking us an hour and a half because we're taking a kind of a awkward flow through the lot. Maybe operationally, if we can hold that property to later in the day when we know fewer cars are there, we can take a more aggressive stance at a wider spread and carve time. But the stacking of the data sets year over year, site after site after site, is going to give you a lot of baseline cumulative averages and a wealth of knowledge that you can apply in real time to those properties, but then also not make the mistakes on anything you bid going forward, because you know where the successes and the failures were.
That's a really good final takeaway. And definitely, I know from listening to Snow Jobs and different podcasts that bidding and contracting estimating is something that is a high demand. So this is definitely a good, people that listen to this or that maybe see a highlight clip of this later, definitely go back and listen. This can be part of your professional development. So Craig, just to close up here from the podcast recording part, people want to contact you. How do they get a hold of you and how do they get a hold of Hilltip?
Yeah, so I would encourage everybody to visit us online. Our webpage is www.hilltip NA, that's NA as in North America.com. You can also visit the home site, the European site, which is hilltip.com. You'll kind of still get to us, but a roundabout way. Phone number at our headquarters is 260-447-7900. We do have an info, contact us, request information tab on the site. All of those emails come directly to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Craig. So this is going to close up the recording on net gain, networking, encouragement, training.
They call you unsung heroes. Well, this is your song.